as if we are live.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone to, we are calling this the Educators Roundtable, and this is the Ramadan report. My name is Jehan Hakim. I'm an educator, educational consultant, and community organizer. You can find me at Jehan Hakim on social media or on jehanhakim.com. I'm an Arab American and a mother, and I currently reside in Houston. And my partner here is Shireen.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for having me, first of all, Sister Jehan, and Ramadan Kareem, Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family. I'm Shireen Soliman. I'm a professor. I'm an educator at the higher education level. I'm an Arab American as well, and I'm also a parent and also an educational consultant, giving support not only for faculty and students, but again too with a focus on young adults at that age of development. And I'm from New York City.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shireen, and Ramadan Mubarak to all who are watching. So today we were hoping to share some actionable steps for educators, anyone who really supports youth or young adults in the realm of education at whatever capacity, for you to be able to take some of these steps away, and then for you to be able to do better, right? Because that's the point. As educators, we need to be able to learn new things, improvise. Sometimes we have to unlearn things, right? Because we all have biases. So I will begin since I'm in the K through 12. That's my area. I think we've all heard of culturally responsive pedagogy, right? It's an approach to teaching and learning that recognizes and respects the diverse cultural backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives of students, right? It aims to create inclusive and equitable educational environments where all students feel valued, empowered, and are able to succeed academically because you cannot learn if you're not seen. And this goes for all of us, right? It crosses into the workspace. You need to be able to be seen so you can be able to retain information. If we know, Zaretta Hammond is a leading scholar on cultural responsiveness, and she explains that culturally responsive education or pedagogy is a way to use culture to build trust and relationships with students, as well as to develop a cognitive scaffolding that builds on the broader knowledge students already have so they can become competent, independent learners. So, we're going to be talking today, like I said, about certain steps that will help you to implement culturally responsive practices for Ramadan and beyond. So I think the very first step is to assess our own behavior. So check our implicit bias. And implicit bias exists in all of us, even the best of us, even the most progressive and the most informed. Implicit bias, as you all know, it refers to the unconscious attitudes and reactions and stereotypes and categories that affect behavior and understanding. There are also conscious ones, which are bigger and deeper problems. And there are many like online self-reflective assessments that are anonymous that you can take to help you do better in the classroom and beyond. So first actionable step is really to understand Ramadan. So educators and school administrators should educate themselves and the school community about Ramadan, its significance, customs, and practices. Understanding the basics helps in fostering respect and empathy among students and staff. Second is to engage with the community. So reach out to Muslim educators, coaches, and consultants like us, Muslim families, community leaders to understand their needs, concerns, and expectations during Ramadan and beyond, right? We're talking about Ramadan now specifically, but this pedagogy, this framework extends beyond this particular occasion. Collaborate with them to ensure that school activities are respectful and accommodating way ahead of Ramadan. I'd argue that to integrate culturally responsive practices and planning out the calendar, events, and all that kind of stuff should happen in the summer, way before the school year starts. And then checking in again with your partners regularly to learn updates, how has the socio-political climate changed in order for you to adopt new information. Another step is to include inclusive curriculum. So integrate lessons about Ramadan, Islamic culture, and traditions into the curriculum. So this fosters cultural awareness and appreciation among all students. Consider including literature and history and social studies materials that reflect diverse perspectives. And you don't do this by talking about 9/11 when Ramadan comes around. Story time, a really short story time. One of my friends who's a parent, Muslim American parent, her daughter, when it was Ramadan, her teacher's daughter chose to put on a video about 9/11. So that is what you don't do. You don't do that for Ramadan. You don't do that for when talking about Islam, for example, when you're going over world religions. It should not the way you look at this identity, this culture is not through a deficit lens. It needs to be an asset base, right? So another step is to accommodate fasting students. So be aware of students who are fasting during Ramadan, provide a supportive environment by allowing flexibility in physical activities, for example, PE, offering quiet spaces for rest and prayer, offering flexible scheduling, adjusting schedules for exams, for example, and other activities to accommodate fasting students. Consider scheduling important events or exams well before iftar. Iftar is the time that we break our fast, or if the classes are in the evening, schedule the classes well after iftar time. Potentially, because even after iftar, there are spiritual obligations where those who were fasting will perform nightly prayers. So I check in with your community, with your school community and your practitioners, partners to see what is the best way forward. Another step is to promote dialogue and understanding. So organizing discussions and presentations or panels where students and staff can learn from each other about Ramadan and Islamic culture overall. Encouraging open dialogue, questions, and sharing of experiences to foster empathy and understanding. Another step is to have inclusive celebrations. So organizing inclusive celebrations or activities to mark Ramadan within the school community. So this could include cultural, assemblies, art exhibitions, a communal iftar, for example, a communal dinner where all students and staff are invited to participate, to break bread together, have a potluck. Um, Another step is to create safe spaces. So ensure that students feel comfortable expressing their religious identity during Ramadan and beyond, establishing safe spaces where students can pray, reflect, or discuss their experiences without the fear of judgment or discrimination. I'd also add here that affinity spaces is the way forward. So affinity groups are meant to be a safe space for students and educators actually who share an identity such as common race or heritage to discuss mutual concerns and help each other navigate K through 12 education and higher ed. That system where they are a minority, where we are a minority. And this isn't, like I said, it's not Ramadan specific. Affinity spaces are key for diverse school sites. Also, staff training and support, that is really key. So bringing in DEI, racial equity practitioners to conduct professional development opportunities for staff to increase their cultural competency and sensitivity towards Ramadan and other religious practices. So that way they can be equipped with strategies to support fasting students, and they'll be able to create inclusive environment because they know better, right? Another piece is addressing bullying and discrimination. So I'm pretty sure it's already federal law that anti-bullying practices are already in place nationally, but be sure that You have really strict and like really clear policies that are implemented and procedures to address any incidences of bullying or discrimination related to religious identity. Like that's really key, and encourage students to report any instances of harassment and not just to take action, but also, I mean, not for them to only report, but also to take swift action to address those, potential harassment. And one last thing, and I think this is something that we are constantly doing, is to regularly seek feedback from students, from parents, from staff about the school's efforts to support Ramadan and improve inclusivity overall. And then you obviously use this feedback to make adjustments and continuously improve practices. Like this is not like a one-off thing. It should not be a one-off thing. This is it should be a constant um, uh, evolutionary, practice where you're always continuing to grow, where we are always continuing to grow. And I'll say, actually, I was kidding. That wasn't my last point. My last point is that this Ramadan is unique. It's unique for all Muslims who are practicing because, we're all filled with sorrow and pain right now because a televised genocide continues before our eyes. So it's a very hard Ramadan globally. It's very hard to continue about our days, like working and learning and now fasting while our brothers and sisters are being, for lack of a better word, exterminated with our tax dollars, right? So many of our students are angry, they're sad, they feel complicit and are navigating all these emotions while fasting, and some students have also lost loved ones in Palestine. So we hear Ramadan Mubarak from the same politicians who are arming this genocide and from the ones who are rejecting a call to a ceasefire. We hear Happy International Women's Month, which it is the month of March, while women and girls in Palestine are being injured, amputated, and murdered. And we hear other women celebrating their misery. So, what it looks like to be a Palestinian, an Arab, or a Muslim student in many school districts across the country is if you speak out in support of Palestine, your freedom of expression is it's censored, or it's silenced. Even in the best school districts, even in the ones that have claimed to say that they are sanctuary school districts, and they passed so many different resolutions after Trump in order to, you know, make it loud and clear to their school community that we will support you. Even those school districts are silencing Arab and Muslim students right now. So what is needed to combat this really quickly? Listen to Arab and Muslim students. Anti-Arab hate and anti-Muslim hate isn't new. This is an old pattern of xenophobic behavior driven by violent US foreign policy. So let them speak. They've been through this before, and their parents have. Talk about the political climate in the Middle East. Contrary to what many think, Arabs, Muslims, and Jews have lived harmoniously together for centuries. Open dialogue is possible. Don't sugarcoat it, but use age-appropriate language, of course. Bring in Arab and Muslim equity practitioners to facilitate these discussions. And I would add also bring in Jewish equity practitioners to also talk about this. So you're having a balanced conversation. After October 7th, Arab American K through 12 educators penned an open letter, myself included, that anyone can endorse and share. K through 12 educators. I'm going to include it either in the chat or I'll put it later on LinkedIn. And then lastly, follow the lead of Arab and Muslim educators, especially Palestinian ones, during this moment. And you know what I forgot to add? We're really sorry because we try to do this on LinkedIn Live, but we were having technical difficulties. So we have moved on to Zoom. And I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it on to Shireen.
Thank you, Sister Jehan. So in the end, for you and I, who are both committed educators and consultants supporting other educators and school communities, obviously we know that there's a lot of overlap between K through 12, and then how it extends into college life, which is sort of this, it's an important transitional phase neurologically, socio-emotionally for young people. So, a lot of the main principles and ideas and core concepts that you mentioned already, we can easily adapt those when we're talking about higher education for learning, et cetera. But I mean, I think I'd like to kind of respond to some of the um, some of the ideas and issues that you brought up, some of the strategies that you brought up, and really, look at them a little bit more, from that higher education lens. What is the experience this year during Ramadan and beyond for Muslim Americans, American faculty, students, and school communities alike? I think that, I'll speak a little bit anecdotally that right now, it is a time of, as you say, sorrow, but it's also a great time of fear. And I mean, I would even go so far as to say trauma, right? So moving from sorrow into trauma, we're obviously for the first time, the live streaming of the massacre, the violence, the humanitarian crisis that's being carried out against Palestinians, our Gazan brother and sisters. The understanding, of course, that as we all as Muslims around the world, we have an intrinsic link as well to Palestine as the Holy Lands, as do all the Abrahamic faiths. And so, our intrinsic connection to this land and to the people and to the history, as it has been informed, as you said, by all of the Abrahamic religions who have lived there for centuries. So, kind of parsing out that this is not it's not a Muslim Jewish conflict, right? This is more about political ideologies, and so we're absorbing a lot of information every day. For young people who are on social media, who have that awareness beyond social media, just in their own communities, at the mosques, in their families, for them to be sort of hearing and processing the injustices, the grave, grave, grave injustices, the collective silence from those in power and politicians around the world. So all of this is, happening as we're processing this, and we're at the same time experiencing this great fear and censorship, and for the fear of our safety, for impact on safety. We know that very well, that especially on college campuses, we're seeing the real, safety, concerns around safety. We know that we saw, the beautiful three young Palestinians and Hisham, who was killed. Oh, I'm so sorry, who was um, paralyzed simply for wearing their kufayas and speaking Arabic. So there's a great fear in terms of, again, sort of being able to overtly and proudly sort of live out your truth and your identity and your culture and your faith. And so, and we've seen other instances across all other campuses. And it's not to say that there are not anti-Jewish hate crimes as well as Islamophobia, but again, understanding that the root is centered from the same origin. It's the othering, it's the intentional biases and discrimination of intentionally creating that divide among people and making them the other, the dangerous other, again, to support, narratives and ideologies. And so being aware of that anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish hate, we're also seeing that there's a connection there between the DEI, as you said, the DEI initiative and the attack on DEI. We've seen now, obviously, for quite a few years. I myself, Sister Jehan, I hesitate anymore to say this is the Republican agenda or the Democratic agenda, because as we see now, I think things are starting up. People are starting to understand things a little bit more systemically. That, as we see, we have the Democrats in power here in the United States, and we're still obviously experiencing that we're very much unheard, and that our humanity is not prioritized, and that there's not that sensitivity to our core humanity as Muslims in the world, and particularly as Palestinians and Gazans. And so, thinking about, again, what are so we were talking about the repercussions of, DEI and these DEI initiatives, and it's like sort of this lashing out sort of against systems as they were, where people are feeling that other people are being preferenced, but rather than looking at it, that it's ways for there to be a little bit more equivalency or evening out because of the structural inequities. We're also seeing, look at how this is playing out around college campuses. Many of us in higher ed had a lot of, we were watching very carefully and horrified at what happened with President Roxane Gay from Harvard, and being held to a standard that in reality we know that is not the same standard had she been white or had she been a male. And so we are aware of, the lashback of DEI. We lost affirmative action, right? And so, even thinking about internal and domestic policy, and also as well as foreign policy, right? So it's something that's been happening incrementally. And you're right to talk about 9/11. That for the time of that I've had children, my daughter was born a month after 9/11. It's all they've ever known is little bit by little bit, in ways that are, in ways that maybe are imperceptible. But how do we start to, again, to sort of create these divides, create the othering, the never ending wars around, these Arabs that are sort of so different than us, and so Muslims, etc. I even think about Aladdin, sister. I did a panel a few years ago about Aladdin, and it seems like it's a very sweet little story about this. It's a lovely story, and there's a flying carpet, and it's magical. But in fact, one of the most, think about how dangerous this concept of agrabah is, right? So this is a place that it's sort of a flattening of all brown people. It is not specific. It doesn't uplift any particular community. It is absolutely the opposite of culturally responsive cultural awareness. I think that at the higher ed level, leaping from that into stories and narratives and history books, and having a little bit more awareness around, if we're looking at histories and narratives, being aware of who the narrator is, who is behind the pen, who is behind the camera. And so a lot of the books and the textbooks and the ways that we sort of are framing histories for so many topics. I'm a fashion and design and communications professor. So it's very much about the story and the narrative, but having extreme awareness, raising your awareness, who's telling the story from whose lens. So we end up kind of starting to be aware that if stories and information has been rooted in a white Eurocentric lens, that it's probably in most cases, we'll know that there's been a history of Orientalism. This is a good opportunity, maybe if I tell a little bit of a quick lecture, or as I tell a lecture, but to remind, as I would talk to my students, remember, take notes from some of the ideas, I hope, from Sister Jehan, what she shared, but also, I'm going to talk about the esteemed professor, Dr. Edward Said, who frames this understanding of this othering, this orientalizing, this exotification of other people's experiences as different from the norm or the default, but something sort of, very, very foreign, right? And so when the more we are able to divide one another and perceive each other as so foreign, we start to internalize that, and it becomes easier and easier to start to justify gross acts of violence and injustices in general. So talking about, systems, students who are studying psychology and sociology, etc. We're starting to see students have a lot more awareness about the interconnectivity between systems. So even thinking about feminism, and so understanding that there's a very white Eurocentric understanding of what feminism means. But for me, as a Muslim woman, my feminism is informed by my own religion, by my own faith, by my own culture. And so what does feminism look like when we have our own agency, but we're not at the hands of a European colonizer, to inform us what civilization means? What does modesty and freedom look like, especially on a body of a woman? So, another thing we were talking about, you talked about the affinity spaces, giving nods to the fact that, remembering that for students, especially at the higher education level, most universities are, those predominantly white institutions, right? We learned some of this language during BLM, and this awareness that when we have mostly white faculty, mostly white staff, et cetera, that there's going to be this block, right, of them being able to really sort of understand our experiences. So I remind educators, I remind people who are caring for our young people on college campuses, yes, do the readings, yes, go on social media, yes, watch all the great content that's out there and read. But I also urge everyone, create spaces where you're interacting with Muslims, interact with us, create spaces where you're hearing directly from us. The importance of the affinity spaces is because, it lessens the emotional labor of having to do the code switching, of having to translate. And so the more that people feel, young people especially, feel that they have that one trusted adult. This is what happened actually for me personally at the beginning of this, of the crisis, of the massacre and the genocide. And we see, what's happening is that I did start finding students coming to speak to me because they knew that I shared a language, I shared an understanding of a faith, of a culture, of a lived experience. And so that's an important, opportunity, I think, too, for student services. I know of a university where they started offering counseling and therapy in Arabic, particularly for Muslims and Palestinians who are impacted. So there's a lot that not only the faculty can be doing to create those one-on-one relationships, with intention of creating that belonging, not just that they are represented in the classroom, but that they belong and that their worldviews and their ideas are welcomed. Um, and so, maybe circling back a little bit about, the stories and even the language that we use when we're communicating with Muslims, when others are communicating with Muslims, take a step back and understand like that privilege, right? And so when stories are told from that white Eurocentric lens, then everything in the way it's named and the way it's framed will reveal that lens. And so, as we're speaking over all these years, or all these months rather, it feels like years, I'm sad to say, but over all of these months, we talk about the crisis in the Middle East, but the conflict in the Middle East, right? And so even understanding that the term Middle East is obviously a very Eurocentric lens of understanding who are these groups of people, middle to what and from where, right? And so, start to incorporate, our own self-defined identity nomenclature, such as MENA, Middle Eastern North Africa, or SWANA, Southwest Asia, North Africa, right? So let us start to kind of take that agency to name ourselves, to speak our truth to power. As far as, the Ramadan in particular, I would say, on a college campus, it's not anymore like K through 12, where students are moving from one class to another. Maybe there's a particular period, you have a 5-minute period. Obviously, none of that exists anymore. But what does exist is that, again, too, if you understand the concept of time in Islam, the concept of how Islam informs a daily life, right? Then you'll understand that, for others, maybe for other faith practices, will know that, for others, there's one day of a week, which is a Sabbath, and that's where there's sort of, the opportunity to congregate and practice their faith is sort of, concentrated there. But for a Muslim who prays 5 times a day at various points through the day, how can we kind of have a little bit of an awareness if somebody needs to step out, if somebody needs to be a little bit late for class? As you said, we talk about iftar. It's not just that that a student needs a meal break, but they're also now, from all evenings from the whole month, really, they're sort of really they're really invested in not only the breaking of the fast, but acts of worship and community. And especially in community, we find so many beautiful opportunities for service. And so this is, something, again, to kind of, think about in terms of scheduling, but also in terms of, again, opportunities to ask, to create spaces where Muslims and non-Muslims can congregate and learn about each other. Ramadan iftars are always open for any faith practice to come and join us in this very, very important ritual, which again reminds us of our gratitude. It reminds us of our privilege. It reminds us of so many of the attributes in terms of like how strong we are, and how we sort of take control and take that agency. We're not, the ideas of instant gratification, right? And so these are all wonderful lessons for young people, particularly. For young people, I will also say, maybe remembering that at the college level now, there are socio-emotional considerations. And so we're thinking of, a typical college experience being, a lot of partying. Obviously, relationships are happening now at this point. So people are really sort of, it's very much about who's seeing who and which party, and a lot of things that maybe for very observant Muslims, they're going to sort of take a pass. And in this way, they could feel excluded. They could feel left out. I myself, and so many adults in the professional world and beyond, we lament that a lot of the networking opportunities are having over a drink. A lot of the gatherings are happening at a place that serves alcohol or at a bar, right? So, we're kind of starting to see that now, and that is being felt now by Muslims on college campuses. I also want to just give a nod to some Muslims who are not fasting. And there can be many, many reasons why Muslims are not fasting. And so just as a nod, as a note of sensitivity for folks who are not in the Muslim community, that it is something very, very private. A person's fast is private between them and their Lord. And so it is, it's sort of, I think it kind of puts somebody on the spot, or it can be awkward or uncomfortable. If you notice somebody fasting one day, maybe not fasting another, not being able to fast the month, etc. and to just have that sensitivity that that could be something if they choose to share with you or not. Um, there's, for many myriad of reasons. And so I think, those are sort of a lot of the things I could even kind of like inflect and talk about everything that you shared, which was all extremely important strategies that go through from KG to college, but also maybe hopefully a little bit more about, the socio-emotional and developmental things that are being faced on colleges' campuses.
Thank you so much, Shireen. I love that. I think that our voices complement each other really well, and an array of educators from different levels would be able to benefit from this conversation. I think we can close with maybe like a takeaway, and I can start. Um, so I will say that I think that, I've been working in K through 12 spaces for some time now, and some educators mistakenly believe they're implementing culturally responsive teaching when they engage in activities like Culture Week or Culture Month or potluck gatherings um, to superficially support,
Mm,
explore different cultures. However, these things are kind of like quick and shallow attempts, and they don't truly embody culturally responsive teaching. Like
mm,
merely adding a few diverse books to a shelf is not sufficient either, It's a temporary measure disconnected from the broader curriculum. Culturally responsive teaching involves more than surface level efforts. It requires a deep commitment to affirming the diverse identities and heritages of students. So during Ramadan and beyond. So I really urge educators to not look at this, approach as something that's an additional, like it's extra work. This is actually part of the work. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you can't teach kids to read or do math when their identity is being, demonized in public society, especially if they live here in America, for example. Um, is not is being silenced, for example. Like we all want to be celebrated, right? So children of all walks of life, we all want to be celebrated. So I really urge educators to take your time and use the summer to really invest in yourself and in your classroom, your school site, your entire school district, to really be intentional about the culturally responsive practices that you adopt. And, like I said, during Ramadan and beyond. And lastly, when it comes to what's happening in Palestine, lift up Palestinian voices. Please bring them into your space. And I would also add that let's not forget the people of Yemen. My family's from Yemen, and they're also being punished right now for their solidarity with Palestine. And let's work together. Like, this is not something that anyone is supposed to do on their own. So please reach out to us, and we'll leave our information somewhere. Shireen?
thank you, Sister Jehan. Um, I think that my takeaway really would be, I think again, as you said, it's not enough to um, to superficially integrate representation of a different faith, of a different culture, of a holiday. I think it's about making really organic efforts to engage in community, to create spaces where there are perhaps, interfaith opportunities for people to learn about each other. College, especially, is such an amazing time. So many of us have wonderful, wonderful memories because perhaps you're dealing with people who are in more homogenous, demographic, people that look like them, and everyone's sort of homogeneous societies. But then now they're in this college space where it's a marvelous opportunity to learn about other people, and to, again, it just happens little bit by little bit as you're spending time, as you're starting to, hear what matters to them, to find out, wait, Ramadan is about family and friends and sharing a meal and breaking bread. That sounds familiar. That's like my religion. Aha, right? So these are the moments of connection and seeing our universally shared values, our shared humanity. And especially, as you say, during now, as we talk about, our brothers and sisters in Palestine and Gaza, understanding that this is not, I hesitate to say pro Palestine because I say, it's pro justice, it's pro humanity. And so, you know, if you could apply that lens to understand that people deserve that right to self-determination, to dignity, to liberation, you know, and so, yeah, like I think this is a wonderful, this period of time, again, as I said, learning about the systems, learning about our interconnectivity. And in this way, I think we can counter the intentional misperceptions, the intentional stereotypes, the intentional again, systems that are at play. Like I said maybe earlier, you know, the Republican versus Democrat, but how about, you know, just, you know, a liberatory, you know, a political movement, right, for our collective liberation. So I think I would kind of just remind people that again too. I mean, somebody, for example, Sister Jan, somebody was asking me, can I just say Happy Ramadan? And as we talked about, maybe every other year, I'm always very happy to say, yes, Happy Ramadan is perfect. But indeed, this year, especially because of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing, maybe it is, I think, more gracious to say Ramadan Mubarak. May it be a Ramadan full of blessings, or Ramadan Kareem, which means, you know, have a generous Ramadan filled with, you know, all that you strive for. So these can only happen, again, like I said, with having these conversations, and seeking out these connections. And so again, thank you for connecting with me, Sister Jehan. And I look forward. Yes, I'm also, we'll make sure that we have all our contact information available, resources available. And I look forward to continuing this conversation, Sister Jehan, even beyond Ramadan.
Thanks everyone for watching. Tune in to our next, you know, I don't know, we'll do this again. So give us your feedback. Take care, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.